Now we're going to go through a few brand names, and we don't have any sponsorship on this channel, and I don't want any either. I'd have to do better and more consistent work then. But if I was to ask the average person nowadays, certainly the average young or lower middle-aged person, to name a battery manufacturer or two, they definitely, I think, go for somebody like Duracell or Energizer. But if you'd asked that question back in the 1970s in the UK, people would have said Eveready, because their batteries were absolutely ubiquitous in this country. That's what everybody used. Now, Eveready, the company itself, has an interesting history. It was actually set up in 1906 as a subsidiary for exporting the American Eveready company's batteries to Britain. And it was actually called the British Eveready Electrical Company. But Ever and Ready became two words when it became British, whereas the original American company had Eveready as one word with only one R in it. And in fact, you can still see that branding on the batteries that this set and many of the others we've looked at on this channel use. So that's the original American spelling of Eveready, and this was the British one. The company actually became independent of the American company at one point. Unfortunately, in the 1980s, it was attacked by a bunch of corporate raiders that I can't even bring myself to mention their names. They were widely praised by the government at the time for the number of companies and livelihoods and jobs that they destroyed. And Eveready was one of their victims and was smashed up and sold back to the original American company, or some bits of it were. The battery that you see here is actually made by one of the companies that acquired some of the assets, and it is made in this country still. But let's not get into that distasteful subject. Why would a battery company make radios? Well, one of the things they did at some point in their history was to buy up a radio company called Listen. They then launched their own range of radios, which all had names like Sky something, like Sky Baby or Sky Queen or things like that. And, you know, those things still kick around. You do see them being restored and sold at vintage radio things. But for some reason, in the 80s, they then decided to start making radios again. But one of the things you'll notice about this radio here, the Sky Leader 3-band radio, is its massive similarity to some ITT radios of the time. This is a smaller thing than the Polo S that we looked at earlier on the channel. Just like the original ITT sets, it's nice chunky controls. Got colour-coded buttons here, which match what's on the tuning scale, and it generally feels quite nice. It doesn't have any mains option. It does have, as we can see, Eveready PP9 batteries needed for it. Seems to be in quite nice condition. There's a little bit of evidence of it having been in the sun a bit and melted a bit on the top here. If you just look at that there, it does seem to have it's got a bit distorted and melted at the top, but otherwise it feels pretty nice condition. The telescopic aerial is okay, and the tuning pointer goes around, so it's promising, isn't it? So let's put the battery in and see what we get. So I'm following the instructions here given with it of always using an Eveready PP9 battery. One thing I will say is that I don't know if PP9s have grown over the years. I tend to find this with a lot of sets, in that batteries are difficult to get in, or when you get them in, it's difficult to get the thing back on, and if you get it back on, it's difficult to get it off again. So they all seem much tighter. I suspect that batteries have got a bit bigger, and especially because they tend to have metal cases now, whereas when these radios were originally made, they probably didn't. Anyway, I'm not going to put this on, and the headline is sort of already telegraphed, so you can see I had the on and off switch on there, and absolutely nothing happens. So that's the pretty short reveal there, and now it's on to dismantling it and finding out why. Right, so we've got a couple of screws here. I can't see anything else, although I'm sure there must be. I think there'd be something in the bottom. Is that another screw down there? Yes, I think it is. And there'll be one here, yeah. So yeah, it looks like 4 screws will bring it apart, so let's get started on that. Right, hoping it should just detach now. Yep, there we go. So we have the wires for the power here. They go into this here. Are they actually on the board? It looks like they are, so it's not just a broken power wire. A bit of further dismantling didn't go terribly well because I took these screws out, which is a very bad idea because that then causes the tuning mechanism to collapse and come off. And I seem to have also in the process unstuck the little pointer as well from the two bits of wax that were held onto it. So let's try putting that back for a moment. So anyway, I've disconnected everything else. I'm just going to put the tracer on it. There is a single chip audio amplifier here, UA7307, which is an old Fairchild chip. I want to see if I can hear any signal coming up on the input side of it. So one of these resistors will be the input side of that, and if we go before the resistor we should be able to hear something. Let's just get a earth on here. So that looks like a very low value resistor. I'm guessing that's power. That's power supply. There we go. So So we definitely got signal there. That was on medium wave. If I switch to VHF, we've got hiss there at any rate. I haven't got the aerial connected. Let's use the Neil aerial here. Yeah. It's not common in my experience that these chips fail. Unless they've had massive amounts of power applied to the wrong side of them. Somebody's put 20 volts back at the speaker connection or something like that, which would not have happened here. What I'm going to do first of all is change all the electrolytics around that and see if that improves matters. Right, well, replacing the capacitors around that chip has made no difference whatsoever. It still doesn't work. I've got the TV servicing book stuff. I haven't got a manufacturer manual for it, but if we take a look at that, the bit I like here is what it says: although the quality of the circuit diagram leaves much to be desired, this is included here for the sake of completeness. So let's have a look at the circuit diagram. And yeah, it's not brilliant, is it? The audio chip is represented as a box here. They don't even really show what the pins are or what it is. But I think it's pretty safe to assume that's the output. So I replace this capacitor and this 1 microfarad capacitor here. There was also a 470 which I replaced here. It's not really related to it, I don't think. I'm not sure whether that is joined to that or not, but it can't be. So that must be just another smoothing capacitor. Anyway, none of it has made any difference, so I am forced to sort of conclude that it's this chip here that is the problem. So the next thing to do, you'd think, would be to replace the chip. Now, here is the data sheet for it, and I can't find any source for these anymore. Well, that's not entirely true. DigiKey have got them, but they are a couple of quid each, which wouldn't be too bad, except they only sell them in packs of 100. So I'm not spending 200 quid on this radio, and I'm not ever going to need 200 of these things. I do have an LM386. I have a few of those kicking around, although that seems to be a bit of a different type of package, really. There's some commonality between the pins that they've got. So I've searched around, I can't find anything that would be a pin-for-pin replacement for that. I'm not sure that I can really even map these pins. So I think what I'm going to end up doing is sort of migrating that. The one thing that I have noticed, though, is that if you look at the circuit board, there is a bit of space around here that was not used at all. So I think I could get the LM386 somehow mounted in here. Not quite sure how. I don't really want to have to drill 8 holes in exactly the right 0.1 pitch on that bit of the board. What I might do is mount a little bit of strip board on top of there with the LM386 on, and put a completely different output circuit there, and then just jump her off here onto that, because I don't really see the prospect of finding a replacement for that. So that's my next plan, and I'll let you know how that goes. Right, so before actually building the circuit, I normally sort of breadboard it out here. But what I then discovered was, and I did, I think, mention this earlier, it might be a possibility, but But I thought because there's nothing coming out of the amplifier, which I've verified, the speaker was probably okay. But then when I plugged it in, nothing happened. So in fact, this speaker... Oh, you can't see it, can you? So in fact, this speaker is absolutely dead as a dodo. So both the speaker and the amplifier chip are dead. Anyway, I've taken the LM386 and done a breadboard circuit on it and plugged it back in. Also taken off some of the surrounding components to make sure they're not interfering with it. So we're going basically straight back into the existing board. So I'm going to transfer this stuff onto here. I probably don't need that capacitor because there's already a coupling capacitor here. I think that one is. So I've had to put a different speaker in. It's a 4 ohm, not an 8 ohm, because I didn't have one exactly like the original that would fit. That said, these chips are quite tolerant, really. They're not really very fussy about whether it's a 4 or an 8 ohm speaker. And we do have sound again, or did. It's not very easy to hear because I've got the speaker against the ground here, against the mat here. Let's turn it up a little bit.
I think out of 115 tests that I played, about 85 or so were against Australia, South Africa or West Indies. Oh, that is unlucky. So
you could possibly do with a little bit more volume. It is possible I could increase the gain by putting a bit of extra components around that amplifier, but I think it's fine really. Let's get this actually put onto a Vera board and put in there, and it should all be done. Right, so I put a different speaker in, and it's similar. It's exactly the same as this one. This one, unfortunately, has got its dust cap bent a bit, although it still works. That one was okay. Doesn't have any effect on the sound. These are quite cheap speakers. I can't remember where I got them from. I occasionally find that if I see some speakers that are small and would tend to fit in transistor radios, because often there isn't a lot of clearance, and modern speakers have massive magnets that don't allow you to get in to a slot like this. I often just pick them up anyway, but I'm beginning to run out of these now. But, you know, they're not necessarily brilliant, but they're no worse usually than the thing that was in there before. And getting hold of one exactly the same size and especially the same depth is almost impossible nowadays, so it's worth picking them up when you can, really. So I put the LM386 in here on a separate piece of strip board and wired it in. I'll just quickly switch over to the circuit diagram. So what I did was took out the original chip here, removed that resistor which was feeding onto the power supply rail through that capacitor. So those wires are just going to that little board. The board is very tiny, partly because it's got a limited space to fit into, and also you have to be very close. I mean, you saw earlier on that the 100 microfarad capacitor across the power was very close along the back of the chip. With all of these little single chip amplifiers, they do have problems with stability quite often. They don't like long wires at all, so you need to put the components as close as you can to it, especially the decoupling components like capacitors and things. Otherwise you tend to get it oscillating and motorboating. That didn't happen on the breadboarding, oddly enough, but it does sometimes happen when you breadboard it, and then when you put it close together on the strip board it's fine. Also, what some people do, and I haven't had to do it here again, is remove any unused strips from the strip board, any unused copper strips, because stray capacitance, again, is the thing that tends to cause these things to go a bit off-piste, so to speak. You'll notice that I put this at a bit of a jaunty angle. This is nothing to do with stray capacitance or anything like that. It is everything to do with the fact that in the back of the thing here, there's a massive pillar, which I didn't realise at the time, didn't clock that at the time, and that won't go back on that board, which is actually a locating one. It doesn't just hold the board in. A bit of a error on my part, but it works okay anyway.
Music by Gustav Holst, the finale to the St. Paul's Suite by the English composer Christopher Hogwood with the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, and the arrival of the Queen of Sheba from Handel, Paul McCreish conducting the Gabriele Consort, and players on Classic FM at almost 2. Hope you enjoy.
REM on Star Radio. Afternoon, Andy Lake here. We've gone back in the day. 6 songs from Cambridge's past. Can you guess the year? Thunderbirds really enjoyed a resurgence around this time, so
Every week at this time, she and guest panellists discuss problems and offer advice. Now, those contact details.
BBC Radio Cambridgeshire. Call us on 2000 85 95.
Really just think I over when I say that, but I mean, Luke can see it, my family sees it, everyone on the internet can see it, that I went from this in the boot.
This is Paul Smith, and it's a big old name, really, and I started doing stand-up 30 years ago. I mean, I've been doing Vladimir for a long time.
Oh, well, there we go. It's back working again, which is good news. I've never seen one go quite like this one before, where the speaker and the amplifier are both kaput. And I can't quite see the mechanism by which that happened, because, as I said, the output coupling capacitor was okay. So there shouldn't have been any massive DC thing which came from the amplifier when it went wrong and took out the speaker. Nevertheless, both were broken, both have been replaced. Not with the originals, because we can't find them anymore, but with something that, as you can hear, is fairly adequate, given that this is not the top quality sound set anyway. It sounded okay to me, and I'm quite glad we rescued it. I quite like this Sky Leader thing. I think the finish of it is quite good. I like the colour coding on the bands and things, and I don't think it's too garish, this, and I like the the fact that it matches the ones on the top as well. So I think it's quite tastefully done. Of course, people may wish to leave comments below as to whether or not my taste counts for anything at all. Nevertheless, I think it was worth rescuing. I'll see you on the next one.